Today we're going to take the horsepower and torque of my 2018 Mustang GT to a whole new level with help from Roush Performance. I love my 2018 Mustang, but if there's one thing I miss about my 2015, it's the raw power of the Roush Supercharger. Well, today we're going to take care of that problem and then some by installing this Roush Supercharger Kit on my 2018 Mustang GT. This Supercharger Kit from Roush Performance is going to fit your 2018 Mustang GT with either an automatic or manual transmission. As always, Roush includes everything necessary for an OEM-style installation. It's going to take your Mustang GT from 460 horsepower all the way to 700, and from 420 pound-feet of torque all the way to 610. The heart of the Supercharger Kit is the new TVS 2650R, which is much larger than the previous Supercharger, makes that 700 easily with a lot of room left at only 12 pounds of boost. As always, Roush provides everything necessary for an installation, including the Supercharger itself, intake, injectors, cold air kit, and everything necessary for a high-end installation. This installation can be accomplished with a good set of hand tools. Now, the only specialty tools you're going to need are when you modify the timing cover, you'll need something to grind down the metal. You also need an M8 by 1 1/4 tap, and either a 17/64 or 6.9mm drill bit. The installation of the Roush Supercharger is a very labor-intensive and time-consuming installation. You want to make sure you give yourself, I would say, the better part of a weekend if you've never done one before you tackle this job. Also, make sure you print out the instructions, read through the entire instructions, and make sure you have all the tools you need, and also watch this video to get an idea of how everything's going to go together. Now, before you begin the installation, you got to determine how you're going to tune the car when you're finished. Now, in our case, we have the Roush software, so we're going to flash it right here in the studio. But if you don't, the first step is going to be remove this computer and then ship it out to Roush so they can tune it for you. Regardless of how you're going to tune, the installation begins right here at the fuse box. Now, what you're going to do is go in here, and you want to either fuse 48 or 49. That is going to kill power to your fuel pump. You're going to start the car up and then let it run until it dies. And what that does is actually drains pressure from the fuel system since we do have to take it apart. At which point, like I said, in our case, we're flashing it ourselves. We can move on to the installation. If not, you're going to pull the fuse box out and then remove your computer and send it out to Roush. Now, like I said, with the fuse out, you're going to start the engine and then let it run until it shuts off on its own. Only take a couple seconds. Crank it once or twice more just to make sure there's no fuel left in it. And we're ready to go. There's going to be 3 phases of the installation of the Roush Supercharger. The first step is going to be disassembly, and then modification, then finally installation. Now, the first step in disassembly is going to disconnect the battery and then move it underneath the car. Like I said, the next step is going to be underneath the car, but it's going to involve draining the coolant. So while we're up here, I'm just going to pop the cap off the degas bottle. Now move under the car. Now that we're under the car, we have to remove this closeout panel. There's going to be bolts along the back here, a bunch of clips, and then bolts all along the front. With the cover off, you want to grab a clean pan, and then we're going to open up the petcock and drain the radiator. Okay, with the coolant drain, we're back up in the engine bay. Now we're starting disassembly up here. If you have a strut tower brace, it will not clear the blower, so that has to go away. Then the intake cover and the cold air kit. We're going to move forward now and removing our factory intake by disconnecting all the brake aspirator, the purge valve, basically all the lines in the throttle body area, including the throttle body harness. Okay, now over here on the driver's side. disconnect this and pop this off as well. We're going to pop off this PCV hose, or if you had an oil separator, it'd be the piece that would take its place. You will not reuse this. Moving over to the passenger side, you want to grab a fuel line tool. You're going to disconnect the line to the supply pump. Make sure you put a rag underneath it because you're going to get a little fuel to come out of it. Once you have the supply line disconnected from the rail, disconnect from the pump as well. Back over on the driver's side, we have to remove this hose assembly here. It goes back to the brake booster. So you're gonna remove these two nuts right on top. And follow back and disconnect from the booster. And remove the line. I'm gonna put a towel underneath this when you pull the line off because you will get some fuel out of it. And remove both fuel rail covers. This side, we already have the nuts off. That side, just pull the nuts off the studs. And remove. Okay, with the covers off, remove both heater hoses. On the driver's side now, we're going to disconnect the sensor here. Fuel pressure sensor on the rail. And then also disconnect all 4 injectors. And do the same thing on the injectors on the other side. And make sure these are all out of the way. Once the injector harness is out of the way, remove the hose that goes from the engine to your degas bottle. With everything disconnected, we can remove the fuel rail next. There's going to be 2 bolts on each side. Now you can carefully remove the rail. Just make sure you kind of hold the injectors up as a little more fuel will come out. Now we're ready to move forward with removing the intake itself. Remove the intake bolt. These will stay with the intake. Okay, now we can remove the manifold, kind of lift it up. And you want to get the harnesses carefully for the CMCVs. And remove the intake. Grab some tape, throw it over the porch just to make sure nothing gets down in there. Now we're going to work on removing our degas bottle. We have an aftermarket one, the stock one's the same way though. Disconnect right here at the bottle. You can leave this hose, just make sure you have a rag in case it leaks a little bit. Then same thing right over here at the inlet to the water pump, disconnect. Now holding this hose upward so it doesn't leak, we're going to remove the bolts and then remove the degas bottle. Okay, moving forward, we're gonna remove the upper radiator hose and then follow it up with the fan shroud. The fan shroud, basically disconnect the connector over there on the passenger side. There's 2 bolts that hold it on. Remove this, just pop off the clip. Now we're going to move the front accessory drive belt, but before we do that, we're going to loosen these 3 bolts as the water pump pulley has to come off once we remove the belt. Now put a 15mm socket on the tensioner, remove tension from it, and remove the belt. Then remove the water pump pulley. And the secondary belt, the AC belt, you can simply just cut off as you're not going to reuse it. Right, so over here again, we're on the passenger side. I'm going to pop this retainer clip off. Put that harness out of the way. And you want to tape up this port here. Now once you're done that, go back to the firewall and remove both the heater hoses. I'm going to cover these up as well. Make sure the opening of the radiator is covered and all the other openings are covered up, and we're finished with phase 1 disassembly. We're ready for phase 2 of the installation, which is modification, because there's certain things we have to modify to use them with our kit. One of them here is going to be this brake booster aspirator hose. We're going to start by disassembling this and modifying it for installation. We'll start by removing this rubber hose from the hard line over here. Then remove the check valve from the other side. You may have to clamp it, but usually just get a good grip on it and pull it off. Moving to the other side, carefully remove this foam. Now we'll disconnect everything else as part of the aspirator here, so all 4 of these are going to come off. If this does not get reused, you can simply cut it to remove it. Okay, we're ready to do some assembly work here. You want to grab this middle plastic piece with the 4 ports on it. These 2 clamps we removed earlier, along with this check valve, this hose, and this plug, part of the kit that is supplied by Roush for the installation. You're going to grab the plug here, the opposite side of the larger port, simply plug that. And this will go on that side. Small clamp there, large clamp here, and that goes on the end. I'm going to grab this hose that's included in the one hardware kit, the large 1/2-inch fitting here. This is going to go onto that. Okay, next grab this line again from the same kit. The last port that's left, put it onto that. And you want to grab the foam from earlier and rewrap this section here. We're going to grab this line here with the straight PCV fitting and then cut the hose so we can remove it. We're going to take that fitting and then the last line we installed, the one without the right angle, the one that ends more of a straight line, install that fitting in the end. And that line is finished. Next piece we're going to modify is going to be the emissions canister purge line. We're going to remove this line by cutting this fitting and removing it from the purge valve. I'm going to grab one of the supplied hoses with a supplied clamp. Install the purge valve into that hose. So the last modification we're going to do off the car is going to be the radiator shroud. Now what you're going to do is take this template, this little stud here, you're going to line it up with that stud, put it right in the center, and these line up on the bottom. And then we're gonna mark holes here, right in the center, where we're gonna drill these out. And then grab a marker. This whole area here has to be trimmed out. Line up a second time just to make sure everything's right where it belongs. When you're done marking the top, you're gonna mark down here as well, as this gets cut out down here. These are for J clips to hold on the degas bottle. I'm ready to drill the holes and then cut this out. Usually a Dremel would work best. Okay, now we're gonna drill these holes out. The next modification is going to be the most intimidating part of the installation, but it really isn't bad if you take your time. You have to modify the timing cover. Now they do offer timing covers pre-modified, but honestly that's far more work than just doing it this way. What we're going to do, this piece here will have to be ground down smooth so that it's equal with the height of these ribs over here. So all this edging will have to come off. This piece here is going to have to be drilled and then tapped. We're going to start by doing the grinding over here. Now we're ready to start the grinding. Now before you do this, you want to cover as much of the engine bay, everything you can, because it is going to go everywhere. You're going to make a mess. We'll clean it up later, but cover as much as you can before you start. This is what you want it to look like when you're finished grinding. Nice and smooth with plenty of clearance. Next thing we're going to do now is drill this out and tap it, but again, make sure you put a stop on the drill bit. You only want to go so deep. All right, now we're going to drill this out. Make sure you put a stop on your drill bit. You have to drill to a specific depth or you can cause damage. It's 35 millimeters is how far you want to go in. Now with an M8 1¼ tap, we're going to tap the hole to at least 25 millimeters deep. At this point, we're ready to begin phase 3, the actual installation. There's a little bit of sub-assembly we're going to have to do still and a few more modifications as we go. But we're going to start now the installation by installing the wiring harness for the intercooler. What you do is basically fish this end here with these two pieces along this wiring harness over here to the driver's side. Over on the driver's side valve cover now, you want to separate the radio capacitor from the retainer. We're going to cut the retainer off the wiring harness and then plug in the intercooler harness in between. Okay, and over here on the passenger side tower, we're going to mount the fuse and the breaker right on this 8mm bolt. Okay, the next two connections are going to be power and ground. The ground will go right here, and then power goes in here. And the last piece here gets fished down between the frame rail and the washer bottle down here. Next, we're going to install the MAF adapter harness. And there's two sides of this. The one that has the bare end wires, that's going to go with the terminals on it. It's going to go over here on the passenger side. And then both of these plug into the corresponding colors back here. Okay, now you want to zip tie the harness to this main harness. Now we have to make some connections at the computer with the wiring harness we ran. To do that, we have to remove this top plug. The easiest thing to do is basically just move these plugs out of the way. And then push down on this tab, pop that out. I should mention, if you sent your computer off, this harness will just be laying there. Now with the plug off, we have to remove this back cover. There's two tabs in here. Kind of want to pry up on these and pull the tab off. Then flip the harness over and carefully pry off this gray cap. Now for this part, you need a very small screwdriver. There's 3 punch outs we have to make on this harness to connect the 3 wires we just fished over here. The first one is location 12. Now if you look, the upper left-hand corner has a 1, then over here has a 15. So we got 14, 13, 12, and 12 is the one we're going to punch out. So you want to take the black pin here, put it in location 12. Make sure when you push the harness in, you'll hear a very light click when it clicks into place. And pin 28 gets the red wire. The green one is an 80. Now with all 3 plugs tight, you tape it back up again. All right, the harness connected, reinstall the cover on this side. And then carefully reinstall the back. And plug it back in the computer. All right, the next step in the wiring is the scent module. Now this is going to connect to your throttle body, and this module here is going to mount in the battery box. And then the power wire connection, we go back in the box. Same place we connect the intercooler pump is going to go there. The other harness is going to be fished over here. We're going to cut the tape and connect to this connector. And remove this tab as well. Next thing we have to modify is down here in the valley, and that is the knock sensors. These need to be orientated more downward for proper clearance of the supercharger assembly. What we'll probably have to do is actually cut this harness back a little bit. The first thing we're going to do is loosen up these bolts. We actually will remove them and replace them with new bolts. We can loosen them up though and determine where the sensors are going to go, and then figure out what modifications have to happen to the wiring harness. Here's what you want it to look like when it's done. You want the harness to lay in the bottom of the valley, and all the sensors basically pointing straight down, and then we can torque them to spec. Because we're running boost, you have to run a colder spark plug. So the next step is to remove all the factory plugs and replace them with the supplied Ford plugs. You can do them all at once or one at a time. I prefer to go one at a time. Remove the bolt, give this like a little twist, remove the coil on plug assembly, and then remove the plug itself. Now the new plugs do come gapped, but double check them. They're between 0.028 and 0.031. Put a little anti-seize on the threads as well. Now we can install it. And repeat the process with the other 7 plugs. Now we're ready to prepare the low temp radiator for installation. You want to grab 2 of these rubber grommets and 2 metal inserts, and with the brackets facing up, install them in the bottom corners. Install the rubber grommet first, then put the metal sleeve in the center. When you're done, flip it over. Then you're going to grab the supplied foam. We're basically going to glue pieces on all the way around the edges. These are the mounting brackets for the intercooler pump. You want to grab all 3 brackets and then 4 pieces of this 1-inch wide foam. These are going to work as insulators on the bracket when mounting the pump. These are the upper brackets for the low temp radiator. Again, these are going to get grommets and then the metal sleeves. These will orientate basically like this. So you see the Roush logo on the outside here. You want it facing outward and then upward, and the grommets go in from the top. Okay, now we're going to grab the intercooler tank. More of these pieces of foam here. One on top of the curve here, then one on the bottom. Flip this over, install this like that, Lay the shrink clamp into place and grab a heat gun. All right, now we're back at the table to do some assembly on the supercharger and the lower intake manifold. And what we're going to do here is grab this PCV hose from earlier, remove that clamp, and separate this hose from this fitting. Okay, now I'm going to grab the hose that we just removed. That's going to go in this fitting here on the bottom of the supercharger. We'll feed that up and put it aside. Moving on to the supercharger itself, we're going to grab the bypass hose. And then grab this applied SIP sensor. Go right underneath there. And snug it down, it's applied torque spec. We're ready to work on the front end of the 2650 blower now. What we're going to do is grab this O-ring for the throttle body, get that seated in there, install the throttle body carefully, the electronics towards the pulley. I'm going to torque these this applied spec. Put the supercharger pulley on, make sure you line up the holes. We'll put a dab of Loctite on each of the bolts before installing them. And then tighten them down and torque to spec. We're ready to prepare our new fuel rail. Now from our stock fuel rail, we're going to remove all of these clips. Then remove this sensor. Take the sensor we just removed, install it in the new rail. Okay, we're going to grab the applied injectors, put a little dab of petroleum jelly on the O-rings, will make them seat a lot easier. Install each injector, and then the clip we removed from the originals. Okay, now you're going to grab the Roush supplied filter, put it on this adapter here for the air box. Make sure the arrow is facing down, and tighten it up. And we're going to put it in the air box and bolt it down with the supplied hardware. Now you want to grab your factory air box, remove this rubber fitting here, and press the metal insert through, and remove the grommet. Over here in our Roush box, take the two rubber inserts and install them on the new box. Next on the instructions here is this intercooler piping. Install the supplied rubber hoses on the end. Install the clamps and then heat shrink them on. Ready to install the lower intake fuel charge assembly. Now at this point in time, if you still have your sound imposer, you want to reach back behind here and remove it and install as delete. Since we already have one installed from a while ago, we're ready to install. Okay, now I'm going to fish the wiring harness down here for the map sensor. Plug that in. We're going to back on the firewall. I'm going to loosen up this ground, just rotate it just a little bit. All right, now grab the supplied hardware. We're going to bolt down the intake. Just snug them down. There's a specific sequence you're going to torque them in. All right, this part's gonna be tricky. We're gonna connect the hard lines to the fittings on the back of the fuel charge assembly. You wanna grab the supplied clamps and make sure you're really careful of the wiring harness while you do this. Okay, the hose is done. We can now torque down the lower here. We torque for starters to 10 Newton meters. There's a specific pattern. Start with the middle one over here on the passenger side. And the driver's side. Okay, now in the same order, we're going to go back to the bolts and tighten them an additional 45 degrees. Okay, now grab the wire that we fished earlier for the ACT sensor. We're going to plug that in, and we're ready for the fuel rails. What we're going to do is line up the injectors. Push everything down to place and then reinstall the bolts. You want to grab 3 of the original fuel rail bolts and the 2 supplied bolts. The shortest one is going to go right here on top. And both on the passenger side of the originals, and then the longer supplied bolt goes down here. Now we're going to torque all 5 bolts to 10 Newton meters, followed by 45 degrees. I'm going to plug in the sensor here then and all your fuel injectors. Okay, I'm going to grab the upper pulley bracket. And tighten them down. And then we're going to torque these to spec. The bracket tight, we can install the pulleys. And then torque these to spec. Okay, now the part we're looking forward to, we can actually install the supercharger assembly on the car. Don't need to plug this sensor in over here. All right, the blower in place. Now we can install the hardware to hold it down. Now we're going to torque to 25 Newton meters in this specific sequence in the instructions. Starting over here on the passenger side. Right, now we're going to install our brake booster line that we modified earlier. This is going to connect back here to the booster. And these lines are actually going to go up here underneath. This line here is going to go to this rear port on the supercharger. Then I'm going to grab this EEC PV that we removed earlier. This is going to go to this green plug here, this electrical connector, and then right there to the supercharger. Then I'm just going to zip tie this to the engine harness. Now with that finished, we're going to remove these fittings and then connect the fuel line on both sides. Next, we're going to grab these brackets. These are for the coil covers and also for the heater hoses. They are side specific. Grab the supplied hardware and install. The bracket's installed. Now we can install the heater hoses. Now this sleeve here you want to put on. We put some tape on it to give it more of a finished look. This one's going to go underneath this line here. Connect up front. And sit in this one and go back behind the engine and connect to the heater core. While Brendan's connecting the other side, I'm going to grab the supplied zip ties and then zip tie these in place. Now, making the connections with the heater hoses at the heater core at the firewall, be careful. The one with the right angle feed that goes on the driver's side goes on the bottom, the other one goes on top. Now grab the supplied PCV hose and connect it to this rubber fitting here. It's coming off the back of the supercharger. Lock in place there, and lock in place on the supercharger. Now we're going to work on the front drive accessories. Now what we got to do here is remove this bolt at the bottom, and this one right here, the end of the timing cover. Now we're just going to lay our drive belt in place before we put on our front bracket. Not put it over the supercharger just yet. Just like that. Okay, what we're going to do now is grab this smaller bolt. Put it up in this corner. Install the pulley. And these are going to go in up here. The instructions provide a detailed diagram as far as where the belt's going to go. Basically, you're going to go underneath your crank, above the little tensioner here, and then down underneath to your AC compressor, up over this, and it's actually going to go up over the supercharger when we put the tensioner on. But as long as you have it correct down here, you can now tighten these bolts. And then we'll tighten the supplied torque spec. All you do is put a 17mm socket in here, and you're going to push down to relieve tension, and then pull the belt up over the blower. Make sure it is seated everywhere else, and you're good to go. All right, with that bracket installed, we can work on the other belt now. We're going to start by reinstalling the original water pump pulley with the factory hardware. Now don't forget, these bolts do need to be torqued to the spec provided, but you do want to install the belt first. It makes it a lot easier than trying to hold the pulley and tighten them down. Again, the instructions is going to provide detailed diagrams of where the belt goes. We're going to go around the crank, around the tensioner, around the water pump pulley, underneath the idler, and then over to the alternator. And now we can torque these down. We're ready to mount the low temp radiator now in front of our factory radiator, which is going to provide coolant for the supercharger. Now to do that, there's a couple different things. Now in the case of my car, I already have an aftermarket grill installed, so there's a couple things that are a little bit different. Your car will have a bar that goes here. You're going to remove the hardware that holds it in place and put that bar aside. Now if your car has an active shutter system, you're going to have to remove your front bumper at this point. My car doesn't, so I do not have to do that. If you do have to remove the bumper, Roush provides detailed instructions on how to do it, or you can also watch our video on the grills as we show you how to take the bumper off there. The first step with us though, is remove this plastic trim panel. That out of the way, we're going to remove these two nuts. I'm going to install the bracket now for the radiator. Now again, if you have an active system, the instructions are a little different. There's a couple spacers and a few things that are different, so make sure you read the instructions before the installation. Then do the same thing on the driver's side with the driver's side bracket. Now we're ready to slide the low temp radiator into place. Now there are nuts on the back of this. That'll allow you to actually tighten it down once the brackets are in place. Next, we're going to mount the bottle over here on the side next to the washer bottle. We'll start by removing this bolt up here and a corresponding J-clip. Okay, put the bottle up into place. You're going to line it up with the bolt coming through. I grab the intercooler pump. I'm gonna put it up into the hose on the bottle we just installed. Install a supplied clamp. All right, now we grab the two top pieces for the mounting bracket for the pump. Triangular side is going to go towards it, and these go up over the frame rail. I'll put the bottom part of the bracket up into place, thread in the supplied hardware. And the back part here, these are going to thread into your tank. Now grab the large clamp, I'm going to put that over the pump. Place right here for it to sit. And then line up the supplied hardware, hold it in place. Now we can tighten everything down. And don't forget to plug in the pump. Okay, now we're gonna grab the U-shaped hose. This is gonna connect on the passenger side of the low temp radiator over the frame rail and then connect to the intercooler pump. Now moving on to the other side of the low temperature radiator, this hose is connected to the fitting on the driver's side. That'll be fished up to the engine bay to the two heater hoses that we run down the driver's side valve cover. Now, unlike the other one, this one will require some trimming of the plastic panel once it's installed. Now we're going to mark the closeout panel where we're going to trim it out. Now it does fit through there. The last thing you're going to do is actually pinch that hose that goes to your intercooler. To make sure it flows freely, we're going to trim the panel. The hose is mounted, now we can install the lower support for our radiator. What this is going to do, it's going to replace your factory piece. It's going to bolt right across here, and these will go up behind and bolt to the radiator. Now these outer bolts here, you're going to reinstall using the factory hardware. Now in our case, the factory hardware is gone because we do have an aftermarket lower grill support that uses these brackets instead. But bolt this on here, then tighten these, and then finally these below. Okay, the hose on the driver's side, now we can connect to the lower port. Make sure it clicks on. And then grab this radiator hose assembly. The only connection we're going to make at this point is this here. That's going to go in the coolant tank bottle located down below that we installed below the frame rail. And just leave that away from here. We're going to reinstall the electric fan. You can reinstall the factory hardware. Don't forget to plug it in. All right, now we can reinstall our degas bottle, the factory one, or in our case, aftermarket one. Take the other end of the radiator hose here, connect it to the other side, the intercooler piping. Install this clip on the bottom, basically gonna force it on, and then connect the hoses. Bottom mounted, now grab the original radiator hose for the upper. Grab this factory hose from the degas bottle. We're going to remove these clamps. And transfer them over to the new hose. Since we moved the mass air sensor, you're going to grab this delete now, plug it in, lock it in place, pop this off, and then just zip tie it down here out of the way. Now grab the supplied dirty air duct and slide it over the factory plastic. And install the airbox. We'll move on to the inlet tube. Getting close here. Now we'll make our connections at the inlet tube. Grab the supplied PCV. Make sure they click. Okay, then the last step of the actual assembly process is to install this cover. So we're going to reassemble our belly pan and we're ready to fill the fluids. Okay, now we're going to reinstall the fuse we removed earlier for our fuel pump, then reconnect the battery. All right, the last step here, there's a few decals Roush provides you want to install. I'm going to use a different viscosity oil now, so they provide a little sticker. There's also a new sticker for the vacuum and the accessory belt. And the last one goes back here on the fuel door, just to remind you to use premium fuel. All right, so once you're finished the installation, you're gonna want to either reinstall your computer if you sent it out or get it flashed. Make sure you don't try to start the car without the tune in it. Once you're good to go there, cross your fingers, hope you did everything right, and you're ready to start it up. And once you have it running, get it up to operating temperature. You want to check the coolant on both the blower and your main coolant. Make sure they're full, make sure they're proper. You're going to make sure the coolant is circulating through here, that your pump is working. Again, double check for everything. Make sure you have no leaks, there's no interferences, nothing like that. And your installation's finished. And there you have it. That's how you install Roush's Phase 1 Supercharger on your 2018 Mustang GT. Like we come to expect from Roush, fit and finish when it's installed, it looks OEM. That looks like it came from the factory that way. And as far as installation time goes, on something like this, give yourself the better part of a weekend. It'll definitely take some time. You want to make sure you take your time, get everything right. Plus, remember to send that computer out to get it tuned. Now, as far as the dyno numbers, we know you guys are dying to know what kind of power it makes. Well, 700 to the crank, we know it's going to make well into the 600s to the wheel, but in the next week or so, we'll get it on the dyno, we'll get you guys some numbers as well. But take your time with the installation, be back on the road in no time.